Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Simon Lendrum toku ingoa. I'm Simon Lendrum. I'm CEO at the Comms Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this Effectiveness Breakfast webinar ahead of next week's Effie Aotearoa in association with TVNZ. So this is by some margin the most popular webinar we've hosted all year, and with very good reason. Speaking today, we've got an amazing double act who've sacrificed their evenings in the UK to share their wisdom and learnings, which in part comes from analysis of Effie entries across the world. So I'm delighted to introduce them both to you now. System One is the leading global research agency for creative effectiveness and emotional engagement. Andrew Tindall is responsible for System One's thought leadership and global partnerships. Fun fact, which suggests that Andrew was always going to take over the world. He got to the semi-finals of the Junior Apprentice with Sir Alan Sugar at the ripe old age of 16, and much to his dismay, if you go onto Google, you can enjoy that after this. Sarah Carter, who's global planning partner at Adam and Eve DDB, is one of the world's most experienced advertising strategists, and is also the co-author of one of my all-time favourite books on strategy. And I'm going to give that a plug now. How Not to Plan, which she wrote with Les Binet, is essential reading. And while it looks imposing at 350 pages, it's also one of the easiest reads our industry has ever published. So if you're inclined to self-improvement, go and buy a copy of this as soon as the webinar is over. And visit systemonegroup.com to see how Andrew's team might help you make more effective ads. You'll also find a link to download the full report on compound creativity on System One's website. A small housekeeping note, please keep sound muted during the presentation, but then feel free to turn your mics on for Q&A, which we'll have time for at the end. But for now, sit back and enjoy as we hear about the power of consistency and the benefits of compound creativity. Over to you, Andrew and Sarah.
Amazing, thank you, Simon. I was going to say we need to introduce ourselves, but you've done it brilliantly for us. Do you agree, Sarah?
I do. I can't add anything to that, and I have never been on The Apprentice either, unfortunately, so I can't.
I've managed to not discuss that for at least 5 years, so thanks so much, Simon, for that one. Right, so we're going to get into it then. Hey, we will probably take about 40 minutes, because what we've actually done for you here is, before we jump into the consistency research, I've been working for the past few years with the Effie Global Case Library, turning into an IPA-like effectiveness data bank, and it really shows us the principles of effectiveness and why creativity and consistency is important. So I'm going to walk us through that, and then we're going to skip Les's bit because Les is already tucked up in bed with a glass of whiskey. It's 9 p.m. in the UK, so he's not with us today. But then Sarah will take us home and talk to us about why how consistency serves creativity, but creativity also serves consistency, which is really interesting. I will start presenting. Cool. So we're here to talk about compound creativity, but what I'd like to share with you for 10 minutes is researching the creative dividend, which, as Simon just shared, is the world's first largest look at the global Effie database. Well, actually, it's an awards case library that we've turned into a database at System One. And I've got some bad news to start us going, because you've all been very naughty marketers. Very naughty marketers. I'm very unimpressed with you because you keep spending more and more on advertising. And when I share this data, there's always some smart ass in the crowd that likes to point out that inflation isn't accounted for, and I'm sure ad spend will be flat if we account for global inflation. But sadly, even when you account for inflation globally, we've been spending more and more on advertising over the past decade and a half. Now, if this was live, I'd be asking everyone if they genuinely thought if we spent 30% more on advertising, we actually thought it was doing 30% more. Normally the answer is hell no. And you're right, we're doing less and less of advertising. So let me walk you through why that is and why consistency is so important. So as I said, with the creative dividend, we've pulled together the Effie case library and System 1's creative testing data. Let me quickly explain to you what the metrics I'm about to share with you are. So luckily, System 1 measure the emotional response to advertising to create our creative effectiveness metrics, which explain how advertising works. But my boss, John Evans, the uncensored CMO, had the mad idea about 7 years ago to test every UK and US TV ad as they go live with millions of people. So we actually had all these hundreds of thousands of ads, a lot of them that were already in the Effie Awards, sat there waiting to be linked to the Effie case library. So we had all this data sat there ready to go. And what I mean by that data is we have the emotional response and the brand response, but why people feel the way they do, the rich tapestry of emotion, the key associations and memories it builds, but also what creative features are spotted in the ad. And also we can test the ad as it's in storyboard phase. So we can take all this data and we can link it to the Effie case library, which actually we've taken the US, UK, European and Irish case library. I'm threatening to add APAC to this, but this literally took us 2 years, so let's see how we go. Which actually represents £140 billion of market share between campaigns between 2007 and 2023. So why is this special? It's largely because a lot of the research done in the IPA data bank, which we all read so much of, the long and short of it, etc., is very UK-centric, whereas the Effie case library is very global. So what we're doing with this research is really just reproving what we've learned from the IPA data bank globally. So what we see in the Effie case library is 3 things. We see business results that are campaigns reported, brand effects, and short-term objectives. We can really nail these three dimensions of all the campaigns, over 1,250 campaigns, that is. And ignore all the fancy metrics. Basically on the left is the stuff your CFO cares about. Looking at a campaign, whether it can report profit, market share gain, penetration, etc., the stuff that you can report to the market to change shareholder value. The stuff in the middle is the stuff you should focus on as marketers. The intermediary effects that lead themselves to business results. These are essentially measures of consumer behavior change, brand awareness, fame, differentiation, distinctiveness, this kind of stuff. And the stuff on the right is all the stuff that you guys are far too focused on. The short-term objectives, clicks, conversions, CPAs, CTAs, blah, blah, blah. All those short-term metrics which really don't link to business results. So let's start dipping into what this amazing data set shares, and then why consistency is so important. First of all, the more business results you guys plan for and achieve, the more share gain and profit gain reported by these amazing campaigns in the Effie case library. So the more of this list on the left, the more of that stuff you achieve with your marketing campaigns, the more share gain and profit. This is what we should be planning for. However, the more short-term objectives your campaign guns for, the less share gain and profit these campaigns achieve. So the more social media engagement you plan for, the more conversion you try, and the longer the list that your campaign tries to achieve these short-term objectives, the harder it is for you guys to achieve share gain and profit gain. So what we're going to see from all this data is that despite you guys all spending more on advertising, we're actually doing less with it. We can actually see a 30% fall in the average brand building effects in the Effie case library, and reported year on year. Basically, campaigns are becoming less able to grow awareness, differentiation, trust, distinctiveness, this kind of stuff. So I'd like to just quickly unpack why we're seeing this and what we can do to change it. Hint, hint, that might be consistency. So why we're seeing brand effects falling. Number one is another one of my favorite books is written by System 1's Chief Innovation Officer, Orlando Wood. This guy, he wrote Lemon and Lookout with the IPA about 6 years ago, really looking at whether advertising is becoming what he calls left or right brained, essentially. Left brained is advertising that assumes people's interest, whereas right-brained advertising is advertising that puts on a show. It earns interest. It doesn't assume it. So one of the reasons we're seeing these brand effects falling over the past decade or so is actually because we're becoming more left-brained as an advertising community, and we're creating less and less entertaining work. And it's really hard to prove this. So what we actually did was hire an intern, and he had to watch every ad break between Coronation Street in the UK since 1992. It was a very, very fulfilling internship for him, I'm told. Very, very fulfilling. But what you can actually see here in this very representative, consistent data set is that advertising is becoming less and less entertaining. And what that's causing, because we've linked an emotional, consumer-centric creative measurement database to the Effie database for the first time, we can see that the emotional response to advertising is falling as well. Ads are getting less and less emotional, and these two data sets are really well correlated, 71% correlation, R squared. So you're all spending more on advertising. It's doing less. Where advertising is becoming more rational and less entertaining, and it's getting a less and less emotional response. But one interesting fact as well is when we look at the US and UK advertising, we can see that the humor response to advertising is also falling. So that specific emotion within emotion, humor, advertising is becoming less and less funny. US is finding a bit of a renaissance, surprisingly, but the UK is still flat. Sadly, we don't have this data for anywhere beyond UK and US because we test so much in these markets. But advertising generally is falling less and less funny over the years. So that's also causing a drop in brand effects because we know the power of humor. You also might recognize these two pictures from just outside my house. I clearly live on, I think this is Leicester Square, or is it Piccadilly Gardens? Who knows? One thing you might also think is driving these decrease in brand effects, and what is crucial for you guys to be aware of when you're wanting to grow brands with your campaigns, is not that where humans are getting less and less attentional. So when human beings aren't seeing a decrease in attention, which you hear a lot of people claiming that mobile phones have scrambled our brains and we no longer can focus for long enough. There's lots of data that proves that attention volumes for human beings has held flat over the past couple of centuries. But also, if you think about it, 20, 30, 40 years of advertising and tech wouldn't have changed millions of years of evolution. So our attention is holding flat. But what has changed is ad stock. Humans, again, don't see 10,000 ads a day. That's a silly figure that someone pulled out of the air for a column at some point. But what we can actually see is that over the past 15 years, humans see twice as many ads a day, from about 600 to 1.2 thousand. So we're seeing the same amount of attention, but the attention is divided in half. So that's really impacting how effective your campaigns are. And now, before I go to bed tonight, I have a diary by my bed. And every night before I go to sleep, I write down Meta's global ad revenue because I'm a really sad wanker. My boyfriend gets really upset about it. But look how useful this data is in blue. You can see here Meta's global ad revenue plot on this chart and how it's exploded over this period. We're spending more and more on digital advertising. Now, I'm not blaming digital advertising because I'm not a fool. You can build brands on digital if you do it right. But what's really interesting is those short-term objectives by the campaigns in the Effie case library. We can see the average number of short-term objectives reported in the Effie case library globally has ballooned as we spent more and more on digital advertising. And these two data sets are almost perfectly correlated. We can't blame digital advertising for all of this, but what we can see is digital advertising is allowing us to become more and more short-term focused, which, as we know, short-termism leads to less profit and market share gain. In fact, because Les is not here with us today, I'll share one of his charts from his new research that he relaunched at the IPA conference in London this week. It's called Go Big or Go Home. Go Google it. It's very interesting. One of the most interesting things I think he found was that ROI, media ROI, is increasing in recent years, but incremental profit is decreasing. So Les is seeing this again in the most recent IPA data as well. Advertising is becoming more efficient, more short-term, but less effective in the long term. Now, before I kill you with charts, I've got a few more for you. This is a really interesting chart released last week as well from Lumen by Newsworks in the UK, looking at how we spend our media dollars globally, but not just on digital media. This actually splits media into two chunks, into high and low attention. High attention TV, cinema, etc. Low attention digital, digital display, out of home, this kind of stuff, the stuff that works in a glance. And what they've seen is not just digital media's exploded, but we've done a complete flip and started spending more and more on lower attention media channels. And we know attention is key to growing brand effects. So it's all seeming doom and gloom, right? Because we're leading to the solution, which is consistency, of course. But you might be thinking, why do you guys care about brand effects? Why should I care about increasing brand effects? And Scott Galloway might agree with you. So let's have a listen.
The sun has passed midday on traditional brand. Don Draper's been drawn and quartered. This notion you can have a mediocre product and instill it with great emotion and just sell a lot of it, that's done. That's over. If you have a truly better product, people will talk about it online and word will get out. So a lot of the capital has been taken out of marketing and is being reinvested in things like supply chain. Can I get you something within 48 hours for free? What do the companies that have added over $100 billion in value in the last decade have in common? They don't advertise. And so the CMOs and marketers, we all love to be nostalgic and say, oh, advertising's coming back, and we give each other awards. Every day there's less and less oxygen in the room.
I can see Sarah laughing. I don't know if anyone agrees with Scott on the call. I don't. Scott's a very clever man, but he sometimes forgets where he came from, marketing. So is the era of brand building dead? Oh, and quick plug for my boss and the Uncensored CMO, John Evans, his podcast. Great listen, a weekly listen. So is the era of brand building dead? Well, I don't think so. And I've got data to prove it. So you guys understand that we still need to be creating these brand effects, those awareness, differentiation, distinctiveness, trust, those effects that I mentioned before. We can split the Effie case library into the cases that didn't create brand effects, and that's the bottom quartile of brand building effects, and the ones that did create brand effects, the top quartile. And we can look at the number of business results created by these campaigns in market. That's the profit and market share gain, lowered price sensitivity, penetration. We can actually see two interesting things that proves Scott wrong. And I know James Herman likes to prove that video from Scott wrong as well quite a bit. And two interesting things. If you create a campaign with brand effects, a campaign that creates salience, trust, differentiation, distinctiveness gains, you always will create more business results. That's very clear in the Effie case library. But what's really interesting is that brand effects compound business results over time. So if you have a campaign that's building brand and you run it for longer, you see more and more profit. Now, before we jump into consistency, it's worth asking ourselves two questions. So how can we build brand and business effects? And it depends where you work. You might go, I need to change my media strategy and my media spend and my planning. Or you might do, I need to lean into creativity. That's how we drive these effects. Well, let's have a look at the first question, and that's media planning. And this is my favorite chart that I've ever made, because I'm really sad and I have favorite charts now. I used to be really cool, but I'm not anymore. So we can actually look at the different touch points, media touch points used in the Effie case library globally. And we can look at here the average number of brand effects they create over 6 months if they were included in a campaign. So how good they are at building brand. If a touch point is over on the right, it's very good at building brand. What again James Herman would call future demand. We can also look at whether a campaign sees more performance effects. That's the percentage of campaigns creating sales in under 6 months if a media touch point is included in a campaign. So if it's up there in green, it's very good at converting demand in market. So we can actually have a look at what media touch points impact this. First up, just to kind of unpick the chart, contests and promos. If you include a contest in your campaign, it's obviously really quite high up on this chart because it converts in market demand really well. But whenever you do a contest and promo, you're milking brand equity. So it's really far left on this chart. It's not brand building. As opposed to cinema. Cinema's really good at brand building because you're strapped into your chair, you can't avoid it, and you sat there with a loved one filled with popcorn and Coca-Cola. So you build lots of long-term brand memories for that brand, but it's quite bad at converting demand. Unlike TV. TV is an incredibly good brand builder, but it's even better at performance. And then slap bang in the middle, one of my favorite channels, I shouldn't say it's my favorite, is radio. Radio is really good at building both the short and the long. But why I wanted to share this chart with you today, and it chimes with, again, new research launched at the IPA this week, is that super interestingly, on the far right of this chart, the most far right, is creators. So we're going to be talking about big campaigns today, me and Sarah, but the industry is moving on into this a new scary world where creators are actually coming out as quite good brand builders. They're not salesmen. They're really bad at converting in market demand. And I've a lot of my creative briefs when I worked at Diageo and Bacardi, and now we do, help with the marketing at System 1, obviously. A lot of my briefs to creators have actually been trying to change short-term behavior. Come to this event, buy this special bottle, when actually we should be judging creators for brand building. They're actually really good at creating that future demand. Now we get this whole picture of these media channels and touch points. You can actually go and find this on our website as well, but this is kind of really interesting global data looking at how media changes the long and short-term effects of our campaigns. And then I'd like to introduce my legally safe and pink superhero to introduce super touch points to you. You'll need to see a trend in this chart, how if you make a media choice that's going to influence future demand, it actually damages short-term demand. There's a great negative correlation, right? As a media channel gets better at building brand, it gets worse at converting demand. And you can see the touch points in pink that we call super touch points. These actually buck this trend, and they are better than the average at doing both the effects. Please note that most of the touch points in pink are traditional channels, apart from creators, right? Which is really interesting. So I've given you an effectiveness background on why we're spending more on advertising, but it's doing less, and how media touch points can help grow our brand and short-term business results. But we're here to talk about consistency. And why is that? That's because creativity is the #1 driver of profit that you can leverage to change your campaign profit. Paul Dyson created this research back in 2014. He keeps updating this research again and again and again. And what he keeps finding is that creative choices, when you've controlled for everything else, actually can lead to a 12x multiplier of your profit. Creative choices is a huge brand driver. In fact, it's the biggest one you can control, because you can't control your brand size without quitting your job and going and getting a new one. So creative quality is a real key thing to drive. However, and I've used this chart to sell a lot of creative testing in my time, but no one really knows what it means, because no one's ever told you how to get a 12. How do we actually grow our creativity to get a 12x profit? And that's what this research and the creative dividend with Effie has shown. We've kind of come up with 5 clear ways that your creative choices can lead to effectiveness in market. And right at the top of the stack, which is my favorite topic, is compound creativity. We've actually found that the most consistent campaigns in the global Effie case library are actually see 3 times more are 3 times more likely to report profit, alongside being more entertaining, not being dull, distinctiveness, brand codes, and emotional payback. But consistency is the biggest one you guys can leverage. And without further ado, me and Sarah would like to introduce compound creativity to you.
Why has Apple stuck to the same positioning and minimalist look for over 50 years? Why have Coca-Cola and M&M's run the same Christmas ads every year for 3 decades? Why don't we ever get bored of them? Why has Nike spent 35 years putting Just Do It on phones, TV screens and billboards? Why have Geico and PG Tips poured hundreds of millions into building brand characters? Why has Amazon built global teams just to make sure everything looks the same everywhere? And why has Guinness never left AMV BBDO?
Whoa, very dramatic, hey? I met that voiceover artist in the pub and it shows. He's got such a beautiful voice. So compound creativity is research that I've been working on with the IPA and now the Effie Data Bank for the past 3 years. And me, Sarah and Les shared our latest update with new data from the IPA and Effie at Cannes a few months ago, where I believe that's where Sarah met Simon, and that's why this is happening. So it's a playbook of how brands can actually use consistency to grow creativity.
Are you in this webinar?
In market effects.
Are you in this webinar?
I think someone's coming off mute.
Someone put themselves on mute, please.
Thought it was a heckler. I thought I'd have to jump off. I often get hecklers. Amazing. Okay, so consistency is all great, but we always call it different things. So I've actually, again, been building a framework for consistency over the past 3 years, and we've really nailed it down into 3 different ways that you can be consistent. And we're going to share this playbook with you today so you can harness consistency to grow your brand's effects. We have creative foundations, what you might call brand roots or brand cohesion. We have a culture of consistency. That's a team stretching idea across time and space. And we have the most obvious one, that's consistent execution, what people sometimes call matching luggage and stuff like that. These are all different ways of being consistent, and they all grow brands and business effects in different ways. So I will walk you through each type, and then Sarah's going to make sure that consistency doesn't lead you down the garden path and show you how you can still be creative within this framework. So first of all, we have creative foundations. That's sticking to the same positioning, the same idea, creative idea, and agency for as long as possible. Bailey's is a really good example of this. They realized that adults weren't treating themselves anymore, so repositioned from a cream liqueur to an adult treat. They worked with Mother for 5 years to execute a new creative idea around this, the Don't Mind If I Bailey's campaign, and over that half a decade, they grew their revenue by 42%. That's larger than some countries' GDP. And it's no wonder, because a brand that has higher, consistent creative foundations, they see more brand effects in the IPA case library. They see more awareness, differentiation, brand image, salience, quality, and trust growth when you judge a brand against these creative foundations and how consistent they are over 5 years. But they also report more business results as well. That's revenue, profit, market share gain, price gains that we talked about. Now, all these charts are really great. You've been charted out today. There's been a very high CPM, charts per minute in this presentation. But what's more interesting is why we're seeing this. And that's because if a brand sticks to the same positioning, the 1 or 2 associations that it wants to position for, and it hammers them again and again, you help with memory encoding. It's a fact that it's much easier to refresh memory structures than to build new ones. So we also see brands that have a higher consistent creative foundations in the IPA case library. They're 7 times more likely to report differentiation change, more awareness change, more brand image change, more trust. This is how brands grow. This is how marketing works, sticking to the same positioning and idea for as long as possible. Now, you also saw that we included agency tenure in this research and as part of this foundation of consistency. And that's because we actually saw in the IPA research, the longer you stick with your creative team, your in-house or external creative agency, we can see that the brands report more and more brand and business results in the IPA case library. Now, you might just be thinking here that this is Darwinism. You know, great agencies get kept for longer, and that's why we see more brand and business results. But we actually see, when we go deeper into the data, that their advertising quality gets more emotional and more distinctive year on year for brands that have kept the same agency. So there's actually something going on where when you stick with the same agency, you make each other better, you grow skills and knowledge. You can actually execute long-term strategy together as well. So actually see this is quite a causational relationship. Unlike CMO tenure. Now, I was told there was some CMOs on the call today, so I'll be very nice. But I was very excited when I was updating this research for Cannes. I wanted to go do the same thing for agency tenure, but for CMO tenure. But we actually found the exact opposite in the IPA case library. The longer a CMO is at a brand, the less and less brand and business results that brand reports. Now, I'm not going to make any outlandish claims because it's too late in the evening for that. But what I'm going to do instead is share 3 reasons why we might be seeing this. Our CMO has been rewarded more and more on short-term effects. That's kind of why I wanted to share all that effectiveness Effie data with you up front from the creative dividend, because we are chasing more and more short-term objectives, and we're seeing brand building going down. So are we seeing CMO has been more and more rewarded for short-term effects because there's more and more pressure? This is worse in America. I work in London for our UK arm of our business at System 1. So it's really hard to find me, hence why I'm so outlandish and outspoken on LinkedIn. But if you're in America, it's really easy to get rid that day. So can you imagine the pressure of a US CMO trying to justify their role and their campaigns? No wonder they're reaching for the short term. The second and slightly more controversial one is there enough good CMOs? Do the good CMOs get moved on too soon when they've proven they can do the job? There's some great research from Spencer Stewart that showed that 70% of Fortune 500 businesses and their CMO moves are actually internal promotions. So are we moving the good CMOs on too soon? Should we start making them sign 3-year contracts? And then finally, is there an issue where the longer a CMO stays at a brand, the less consistent their work gets? And as we're showing here, consistency is a key driver of these things. So lots to think about. But let's move on to the second way you can be consistent, and that's a culture of consistency. Gecko in the US is a really good example of this, where they allow their ads to wear in for a very long time. Gecko has actually used some of their TV ads in the US for 7 years, the same ad for 7 years. They also execute their campaign ideas across the media mix very consistently, as you can see here. They've also committed to showmanship, which I'll explain what I mean by that. And they reuse assets across campaigns. Now, I just want to show you a few things, kind of proof points within this culture of consistency. And the first one is wherein marketers are pulling their campaigns and assets far, far too quickly. We can actually see when we look at the top 80 UK TV spenders in System 1's database, we can see there's a brilliant relationship between how long on average that brand keeps their ad on air for and their change in distinctiveness. We actually can see my favourite brand at the top here, Yorkshire Tea, that keeps their TV ads on air for an average of 2 years at a time, sees a 15 percentage point increase annually on their ad distinctiveness. So there's one simple lesson here. Only marketers get bored of ads. Consumers don't get bored of ads. Mark Ritson said it best. We're pulling our cakes out of the oven too soon. We should be leaving our cakes to prove and bake much longer. The other thing we looked at in the culture of consistency is commitment to showmanship. Now, I used to help run Johnny Walker at Diageo, and we'd make a really great brand building campaign. It'd be really entertaining 1 year, and then we'd panic and we'd go back another year and the next year and tell everyone how delicious our whiskey is and get into the product truths about our whiskey. And then we'd panic and start doing a more entertaining ad the next year. We'd yo-yo between what we call showmanship, which, as we know, showmanship is dying, from that research I shared before. Well, actually, we've launched new research with TikTok recently called the long and short form of it. We can actually see that the more entertaining and more showmanship an ad is, leads to more emotion, more attention, and more awareness. So if you can commit to being more entertaining, you get more of this consistently. And finally, for a culture of consistency, if you judge a brand by this pillar of consistency, we actually see you're 6 times more likely to report incremental profit in the IPA case library. Consistency is a profitable team sport. And our third and final pillar of consistency, and that's consistent execution, using the same brand, look and feel for as long as you can. Now, a brand that sits very close to Sarah's heart and mine, because I love it, but Sarah's actually done all this work, not me, is Great Western Railway, a UK rail brand. Now, they found a very Rory Sutherland-esque insight a few years ago that planes and cars may be quicker and cheaper than a train, but nothing beats a sense of adventure on a train. They've worked with Sarah and Adam and Eve, DDB, for nearly a decade now, and they've executed the same look and feel campaign over that time. Now, what I love about this as well with Great Western Railway is that because they're a train brand, they have to come up to pitch every 5 years. And Amanda, the marketing lead there, maybe I'm oversharing here, Sarah, but I'm going to carry on unless you stop me. But, you know, they have to take it to pitch. So they got a few agencies to come in and present new ideas. And because Amanda's one of the most legendary marketers in the world at Great Western Railway, she actually not only stuck with Adam and Eve, but they ignored Adam and Eve's new ideas and carried on executing this brilliant campaign. Amanda's a marketing legend. I've never met her, but I talk about her at least once a week. So you might think consumers have got really bored with the same cartoon executed across a decade. But what's really interesting is when you look at the System 1 data, consumers actually start reacting more and more emotionally to it. At the start, this campaign was getting around a 3-star on average in 2017. Now their assets are getting a 5-star in System 1's emotion-first testing. But that's because familiarity doesn't breed content, it breeds contentment. People like the familiar. I'll prove that to you with a final chart. So when we split all the IPA brands into thirds by how consistent they are against this framework of consistency that I've built, we can actually see that the least consistent brands, the bottom third, not only get a lower emotional response in their System 1 testing, but their advertising gets less emotional over the 5-year period that we've studied them, where the brand is changing more and more, and we're actually seeing that their brand advertising is getting a less and less emotional reaction. Dramatically different to the most consistent brands in this research, the top third, where yes, they get a higher emotional reaction, but their star rating, their emotional response to their advertising, actually goes up by nearly a quarter year on year. And that's why we call this research compound creativity. I forgot what it was called then. I clearly need bed. Compound creativity. Because the gap between you and your inconsistent competitors just grows over time as they change their logo, their pack, their campaign, their assets, their tagline, their tone of voice. They start again every quarter, whereas you're compounding your creativity and creating a beautiful dividend. You can actually model the in-market expected growth rate from this advertising quality metric, our star rating. If you're an effectiveness wanker like myself, you'll call it expected ESOP efficiency. I would expect the advertising creative quality to work media spend twice as hard for the most consistent brands. If you don't believe me, when you go and look at the IPA case library and you split them via this framework, these 3 ways of being consistent, you can clearly see 2 interesting things. One is consistency is clearly how brands grow. But the other is you can be really inconsistent and still see these brand growth effects. So, you know, really inconsistent brands, 20% of them still built salience, but you're making it so much harder for yourself. Why make the job harder for yourself? You can even go and look at it in the Effie case library. We can see that consistency compounds business results. More and more profit, market share gain, penetration. The more consistent brands, that top quarter of consistent brands, report a 4 times higher ROI, and they're 3 times more likely to report profit. So I have now shared what I wanted to share. So I'll quickly share with you one shout that we thought was important from Les at Cannes. Then I'll hand over to Sarah. So Les made a big deal about, consistency is not enough. You need media commitment. What he meant by that was actually James Herman and Peter Field worked with Walk back in 2020 to talk about creative commitment, which looked at 3 factors in the Walk database. That's campaign duration, how long you run it for, and the number of media channels. Have you committed to putting it across in more spaces? And the budget. Have you backed your idea with more and more budget? They found a very similar thing to the research we're looking at here. The higher your creative commitment score, the more very large business results. So you need to be creatively consistent, and you need to commit. You need to go big or go home. So before I pass over to Sarah, I've got just one last plea for you. And marketers, you should log off at 4 p.m. You should run a bath, not a shower. You should smoke a cigar. You should be very lazy. Laziness is good for profitability because consistency compounds creativity. Sarah, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew. And hello, everybody. And you can sit back with your coffees and have a bit of relax now because you've done all the charts and the numbers, and you're going to see some pictures now. And hopefully, we're going to coordinate this okay because Andrew's going to be doing my charts for me. So yeah, we did this at Cannes, as Andrew's saying. So it seemed like obviously the Festival of Creativity. And this seemed like a good question to ask at this stage. What's creativity got to do with it? I mean, all that stuff about staying the same seems like that's the complete opposite of creativity. So yeah, what's creativity got to do with it? And that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So our human brains love repetition, but we only love repetition up to a point, the point when things start to feel repetitive. And that's why kind of leading songwriters aim for something that they call disguised repetition. And I really love this word because I think this phrase, I think it's a really useful phrase for us in our industry because this is where creativity comes in. Disguised repetition is the superpower of creativity. So it's interesting to me how it's always been interesting to me, but away from our world of advertising, some of the world's most creative brains ever have positively kind of relished the creativity that comes with disguised repetition. So this you'll be familiar with is Monet's water lilies. And he spent the last 30 years of his life painting 250 variations on a theme of water lilies in his garden. You'll also be familiar with Van Gogh down the road from him in Arles, who returned again and again to painting himself in his self-portraits. You'll be aware of Warhol and the work he did with Marilyn. And you'll also possibly be aware of David Hockney, who spent lockdown in his house in Normandy, where out of his window he painted 200 paintings of the Normandy spring in lockdown. And then if you go over to music, one of the world's most favourite pieces of music, Nimrod, is that's nice. I always forget the music's coming at this point. Just enjoy a bit of that. So this is number 9 of Elgar's variations on a theme. And then if we go over to the west coast of the States, the brilliant script writers on Simpsons have written 780 episodes, and they're still going strong. So far from this being the kind of death knell of creativity, it's always seemed to me that the kind of epitome of brilliant creativity is to be able to create disguised repetition or variations on a theme for a brand across channels and across time. And this Marmite is one of our Adam and Eve brands. I think we probably had it when you were working there, did we, Simon? We've been working on this for 30 years now, and our brilliant creatives have been able to create disguised repetition across a huge variety of channels, of different product types, and have won numerous awards, creative awards and effectiveness awards over that time to do that. So we've been working on it 30 years. I'm going to show you now coming up this. So as one ad this is from 17 years ago, and then after that we'll show you an ad from 2 years ago. all disguised repetition on the love-hate theme for Marmite. So this is 17.
Would you like to sit? Coffee.
Please.
And then a piece of film from 2 years ago, award-winning.
A recent scientific study has shown that babies in the womb may be able to taste what their mothers have eaten via the amniotic fluid. So we decided to carry out our own study.
Here you go, madam.
Sir?
Oh, it's not for you.
She loves it. So weird.
It's not that weird. I quite like it.
Could be that your partner's genes have affected baby's reaction. Oh. Oh, look. She's so cute.
I love her. Takes after me.
Did you have to say that? Hold on. It's updating. Oh.
So it's a hater?
That doesn't look like a hater to me. Does it to you?
Oh! Could you print me off some stills, please? Yeah.
I think I look great in the kitchen. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the downstairs toilet.
So that is brilliant disguised repetition in action there. So we've looked at what creativity does for campaigns, but what we perhaps talk about rather less is what campaigns do for creativity, because far from being a kind of graveyard for creativity, I think campaigns are a kind of superpower for creativity. There's loads and loads of creative advantages to having a long-running campaign. So we're going to look at some of those examples through another brilliant long-running campaign, which hopefully you're aware of, Specsavers, which has been going for 20 years. So let's look at the different ways that a Specsavers campaign has helped them win so many sort of creative awards. So the first thing is, when you've got a campaign like this, repetition helps hugely by building memory, which helps hugely with branding scores. And that, as we all know, is incredibly helpful creatively. So you're not going to have any more discussions over the size of logo to increase the branding. You're not going to have to kind of crowbar product in where it's not belonging in your creative work. And nor are you going to be tempted to put that little brand up, the logo at the top of the film, to sort of leave it there all the way through the film and hope it increases the branding, which we've all done and we all know doesn't really work. I mean, for something like Marmite, the branding scores are just knocked out of the park every time you do pre-testing. And that's kind of what the aim for all of us should be when we've got a campaign like that. You're never going to get a red branding score because you've established it so thoroughly through repetition. And that is incredibly liberating creatively, as we know. Repetition is brilliant for humor too. When people are in on your joke, they get it very quickly. It's hugely liberating creatively, and you can do some fantastic stuff like this. And I think there's a lot of talk in the industry, isn't there? And Andrew's picked up on it earlier, how humor is just such a superpower, but we're seeing less of it than we used to, and far less of it than we should be using for effective campaigns. And I think if we had more campaigns, we would probably have more humor. And it would correct that kind of imbalance in the stuff that we're producing at the moment. And by the way, when you do have this speed of getting an idea and the humour, you can do brilliant posters. And I think it's not a surprise that both Specsavers and Marmite, both very long-running campaigns, are consistently winning creative awards for brilliant poster work like this for Marmite Dynamite. Repetition has another benefit, that it increases the believability of what you do. There's a strange quirk in our brains that the more easily that we process something, the more believable we find it. And that's incredibly helpful for us creatively, because we've all been in situations where you're having to crowbar rational reasons to believe into things, where you're trying to create something emotional. If you have a long-running repeated campaign, you have the sort of believability that means you don't need to do all that rational reason to believe stuff in your brand work. And Specsavers is a brilliant example of this. Obviously, they've started off testing Sight, but they have quite a big business now in testing hearing as well. And they were able to win. Sorry, if you just go back, Andrew. Brilliant. Well, when they went into...
We were doing so well. I'm so sorry, Sarah.
No, don't worry. We're nearly there. We're nearly there. When they went into home hearing tests, they could produce this brilliant Rick Astley, which won at Cannes 2 years ago, I think, work, because they weren't having to justify their credentials in hearing tests, because their kind of familiarity and repetition gave them the credibility to do that. And then lastly, when your creative idea is incredibly well established through repetition, I'll wait for the next slide from my slide changer. Hey, here we go. You can play with your creative idea, and that's creatively really exciting as well. So this is for Specsavers' new home visit service, and they could flip their normal line of should have gone to Specsavers to I don't go to Specsavers. So the more familiar your line is, the more you can play with it creatively. And again, huge amounts of award-winning campaigns coming from Specsavers because of the familiarity with that. So I ended with Cannes with a kind of plea, which is a bit cheeky, but it was well meant and I think well landed. So my plea to Cannes and to all of us really is, let's celebrate and reward not just the kind of commercial power of campaigns, but the creative power of campaigns and the consistency as well. So let's celebrate what campaigns do for creativity and what creativity do to campaigns. And I kind of finished by saying, from Monet, as we've seen, to Marge in The Simpsons, to Marmite, brilliant disguised repetition is the sort of creativity that we should be looking for and rewarding. And that was my piece on creativity and campaigns. And yeah, I think that's it. You can steal lots and lots of charts with numbers on, or some pictures from me through that if you'd like to. And I think we're going to have some questions if anybody has some.
Yeah, enormous thanks to Andrew and Sarah. Andrew, I'll ask you to leave that slide up just for 30 seconds more so people can use the QR link. But then perhaps if you stop share, then we can, everyone can join as a group. And if you'd like to put your cameras and your mics on, do feel free. Hopefully, after that fire hose of charts and inspiration, we've got a few questions. So, Andrew, can I ask you to stop sharing so we can get a view? And perhaps if I ask for hand raisers from anyone who might have a question for Andrew and Sarah, and all questions are good questions.
Oh, you can post in the chat or the Q&A function if anyone's really shy. I encourage a grilling. Please grill us.
Come on, test Andrew's Yorkshire shyness. We are
just go and start your work.
we are a reticent.
You did say nation. You were a shy lot down in New Zealand.
Hang on, I have got the. Is there something in? There's a question in the.
Jen, that's a great question. Is organic social not a super touch point? I actually wrote a column on this morning. I see organic social. Actually, you guys will know him. David Walsh, the infamous professional gambler that made his career professionally gambling. And then stopped and then launched Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art in Tasmania. I am now encouraging marketers to go to the Walsh School of Modern Marketing, because I think there's two things we can learn from David Walsh with organic social. One is organic social is a risk. You're never too sure if you're gonna go viral or ever get enough reach to touch the sides. Les was sharing about this at IPA this week, at the IPA conference this week, where I think 4% of John Lewis, an iconic account from Adam and Eve in the UK, 4% of their reach came from kind of digital viral, they're really viral campaigns, but 97% of their reach came from paid TV. So often no matter how viral you can go for organic social, it's never going to scratch the sides in terms of paid reach. But, you can do it. So I encourage marketers to be like David Walsh and become a professional gambler, which means how are you going to build a strategy to up the odds of you going viral? And then secondly, you need to learn from David Walsh, where he learned to get out. He stopped gambling and started spending his money building a legacy, the Mona. There's a brand called Little Moons, which is a mochi ice cream. I don't know if you have it in, Simon, do you have it in your market?
I don't know.
It's a very Gen Z mochi ice cream. They went viral on TikTok, realized the end was in sight, and started spending on TV. So this beautiful lift in physical and mental availability for free, but then realized it wasn't going to happen forever. They learnt to stop and start spending on paid reach. So it's really hard to say if organic social is a super touch point, but I encourage all marketers to go to the Walsh School of Modern Marketing.
Thank you.
Long answer, hey? I don't have a column for every answer stored, I promise.
Well, let's see if you've got a column for this one. So we've got another question from you mentioned this is the eternal question. You mentioned big budgets to back creative ideas. What if the budget is like 10K for a whole campaign? Can you answer the sort of budget question and the challenge for smaller brands?
I think I've kind of answered it there, but Sarah, have you? Would any Adam and Eve client have a 10K budget? I'm not sure, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think Mark Ritson's answered this a bit, isn't he, as well? I mean, it's okay. You just have to try. I mean, it is all about reach. I mean, that's what Les talks about so much. But you can define you have to define where you're going to play so you can maximize the reach within it, really. And that might not be the whole market. That might have to be a kind of a segment of it. But I mean, it's a tough one, and it would be lovely to say, oh, it doesn't really matter, and you can do the same thing, but you can't. And the numbers are really important. I mean, Les always talks about reaching 1 million people is a kind of rounding error in marketing. It's I mean, I don't know what your populations and market sizes are there so much, but this is in the UK. But it goes back to what sort of Andrew's saying as well. You're so often like, oh, we want to go viral, or we want something to do. There aren't such things as free lunches, really. You might get lucky and go viral, but generally speaking, you do have to spend to get the reach, and you just have to define your, where you want to compete so you can reach as widely as you can within that area. I'm sorry, it's not it'd be easy to give platitude answers to say it's easy, but it isn't.
Yeah. There's some smart media choices these days, like connected TV, that you could actually reach the same smaller group with a smaller budget and almost achieve the right frequency and reach within that first group. So almost like proper segmentation, right? Work out what your first segment will be, but then what segment will then allow you to then go and get someone else afterwards.
There was a lot of talk, wasn't there, at the Effectiveness Conference last week in the UK, Andrew, about testing and experimentation, there was a very good IPA winning paper on lathe weights. I don't know if any of you have read that, but it was a privately owned wine company that has never done TV advertising at all, and they did a meticulously constructed test that gave the business the confidence to start very small and then grow as they kind of proved its worth. And I think that used to happen a lot more, but there's just very few tests set up like that now, and it's easier to run those sorts of tests now. So I think that might be another answer. Sort of start very small, try and prove what works, and then you can scale up and roll out from that. And maybe that's enough nowadays.
My final, more obtuse answer is go look at what I believe it's it's one of the Glenn Morange has done with Harrison Ford, where they pulled forward 5 years of advertising budget as capex, and then spent it all on Harrison Ford, and they've committed to using that campaign for 5 years, which I think is a very smart move.
It's another really important point on consistency, isn't it? That our knee-jerk reaction as an industry has been to create new ads every year, and we all know the kind of reasons for that. People like doing new stuff, and it's fun making ads and all that sort of stuff. But that production budget is not necessarily, if you're making ads that are going to run for 4 or 5 years, which the research shows that they can. So maybe a kind of redistribution from production spend to media spend will be happening more, which helps with those budgets as well.
Yeah. Jack Cumming, I can see your question about, have you got any successful case studies where marketing has shifted their approach from short-termism to long-termism? I will find you on LinkedIn, mate, and I'll send you the Wagamama's UK case study where they actually went hard on cinema to stop the discounting in QSR category in the UK, and they saw an incredible shift. But also go look at Uber, where they turned off their branded search in lockdown and nothing happened. I'll send you the Wagamama's case study. So have you got a client that you've managed to move
well, that
from?
Laithwaite example is a good one, because that was a direct sell to customer business. So it was all very short term, and it was a really big deal for them to invest in brand building. But it's a brilliant paper to show how they kind of turn the business round to think differently about that.
I'll try get us that case study as well. It kind of speaks to David Walsh School of Marketing, of modern, I think it's called modern marketing. I don't know. I came up with it last night drunk, where Laithwaite went big because of lockdown randomly, and they capitalized on that virality. Lockdown stopped happening. No one's getting wine delivered, and they put all that money into reach and transform their business. We've got a question on, are we in danger of preaching to the choir here? To CMOs, how do we get this into the C-suite to get people interested in consistency in marketing? I don't know. I present about 4 or 5 times a day to our clients on things like this. I'm trying my best. Sarah, how could we get the C-suite to care more about this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is getting the data, isn't it? And we have that, and then trying to kind of, I mean, this should be very convincing data to C-suite, shouldn't it? It's sort of playing to the stuff that they should be interested in, the kind of payback from this, the fact you don't need to keep making new ads, the fact you can run old ads again and again. This all should be kind of music to their ears. So I mean, I don't know, why aren't we doing a better job? I don't know if any of you got a view on it. I do think this is getting through more than it was, certainly. I mean, Les and I wrote in that book that Simon put up about there isn't any wear out. I mean, that came from an article which probably at least 15 years ago we wrote that now. And really there was very little traction or discussion of any of that. And now it's now kind of on LinkedIn, it's sort of received wisdom that there's no such thing as wear out. And there's a lot more knowledge generally about this stuff now than there was 10 years ago even. So that at least we can celebrate that. And I think Andrew and his company and Mark Ritson and co have got a lot to do with that, and good on them.
Great question about AI, although I did say to Simon AI was banned on this call and I refused to answer AI questions, but I'll answer this one. AI is allowing people to, this is from Hamish, sorry, to create emotionally interesting work, yet potentially very creatively inconsistent. Does the pro outweigh the cons? First, Hamish, I would argue, is AI allowing us to create emotionally interesting work? Maybe. I think we see some good examples where there's an idea from a human team that AI has allowed them to generate it very cost effectively, and I think it's lowering the barrier in that sense. But I think the key blocker as an industry for AI, and I saw someone from Meta talk about this the other day, where how marketers need to stop. You'd hate this, Sarah. The quote was, I'll go and find it and send it you. Marketers need to stop thinking in campaigns because AI isn't. AI just creates thousands of assets. It's going to get so much out there. Campaigns don't matter anymore. I actually reached out to him as like, the fact that AI isn't thinking in campaigns is the exact issue. So I think the next unlock for our industry is, AI creation and all these AI tools that are actually thinking in campaigns and can lower that barrier to entry with keeping that consistency there. Should be very easy for AI to do. Here are my brand assets. Here's my idea, etc. But I think we're still quite a far way off. Then, Hamish, you've got a cheeky second question. You'll be getting mine and Sarah's invoice in the post for this one. Given your chart on CMO versus agency tenure, how often should agencies encourage our clients to change their CMO to unlock more brand and business effect? Oh, you were kidding. Okay, you were kidding. I'm not answering that one then. Simon, can you see any more questions, or can me and Sarah go and join Les for a glass of scotch before we go to bed?
Well, I think Les will be asleep long ago. But yes, let's wrap that up. What I will do for all listening is I will extract from Andrew in the coming days the case study references, and Sarah, I'll get the Laithwaites one. And I'll make sure an email goes out to all attendees with those links. We'll also, for a short period of time, have a link to the recording so that you can go back and examine the charts in granular detail that we're racing through today. But I'd like to say an enormous thank you to Andrew and Sarah. It's late at night in the UK. You've given your time very, very generously to share this work with us. And it's been a great session, and lots of emojis throughout to validate that. So thank you, everyone.
We really appreciate you having us,
attending.
Simon. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, thank you from all of us here in New Zealand.